In 1931, at a Society of Automotive Engineers meeting in West Virginia, a 51-year-old strategic disruptor stood before an establishment audience and delivered a critique that would define automotive history. He argued that blind reverence for tradition was the ultimate enemy of genuine progress, and that the entire American car industry was heading down a strategic dead end. None of those experts realized that this man would soon build a machine so radically ahead of its time it would take half a century for the market to comprehend it. His name was William Bell Stout. His legacy is one of the most remarkable yet forgotten chapters in industry history. But who was this strategist who dared to challenge the giants of Detroit? To understand him, we must look back at his early career. Stout was born in 1880 in Quincy, Illinois, and from boyhood, he possessed an obsessive passion for flight and locomotion. After attending Hamline University and then the University of Minnesota, which he had to leave because of severe eyesight problems, he plunged into the engineering sector with a relentless energy that would never truly leave him. By 1907, he was chief engineer of Schurmeyer Motor Truck, and by 1912, he landed a deeply influential strategic position, becoming the automotive and aviation editor for the Chicago Tribune, one of the most powerful media outlets in America. This dual identity, part analytical engineer and part media communicator, became his ultimate strategic weapon. Stout did not just know how to build machines. He knew how to market them to the public better than anyone else. In 1914, he joined Scripps Booth Automobile as chief engineer, and 2 years later, Packard recruited him to run their aviation division. This is where you and I see his real trajectory begin. Stout became obsessed with aircraft and the lightweight efficiency of aluminum structures and the aerodynamic sleekness of fuselages. He realized the future of transport lay in structural optimization, making every vehicle lighter, more efficient, and hyper-functional. In 1919, he established Stout Engineering in Dearborn, Michigan, and began designing all-metal aircraft. This was a radical departure for an era when planes were still built from wood and fabric. Then came a stroke of strategic genius that changed everything. Stout needed capital to construct his prototypes, so he drafted a bold circular letter aimed directly at America's top industrial barons. The letter essentially offered them a single guarantee for their $1,000 they would never see that money again. It was absolute madness, yet it worked. He raised $20,000, securing backing from Henry Ford and his son Edsel. This sparked an alliance that would ultimately yield one of the most famous aircraft in American history. The Stout Metal Airplane Company launched in 1922, produced the first all-metal commercial airliner in the United States. Henry Ford, deeply impressed, bought the company in 1925 for $500,000. This acquisition formed the Ford Motor Company's aviation division, giving birth to the legendary Ford Trimotor, affectionately nicknamed the Tin Goose. This three-engine workhorse revolutionized American commercial aviation, flying passengers from coast to coast for the first time in history. Concurrently, in 1925, Stout established Stout Air Services, which inaugurated America's very first regularly scheduled passenger airline the following year. Yet his relationship with Henry Ford was highly volatile. Stout's first directly designed three-engine prototype, the 3AT, proved to be a design disaster during 1925 test flights. It was severely underpowered and barely flew. Henry Ford, who had heavily hyped it, was furious and ordered Stout completely banned from the engineering design room. Stout was sidelined into a promotional figurehead role, lecturing and marketing aviation, while other engineers quietly redesigned his work, transforming it into the highly successful Trimotor. Then, roughly 2 months after the 3AT failure, a mysterious fire leveled the Stout factory, incinerating every prototype inside. The cause remains highly suspicious, leaving historians to question whether this was a genuine accident. When the Great Depression devastated Trimotor sales, Stout officially severed ties with Ford in 1930. But rather than retreating, he did the opposite. He returned to his Dearborn laboratory and turned his strategic focus toward a new industry. If the aviation industry was stagnating, he reasoned it was time to apply his hard-won aerospace insights to a completely different machine, the automobile. Writing for Scientific American, he argued that the day the auto industry finally detached the horse from the carriage design, drivers would gain vastly superior visibility, and vehicles would become lighter, safer, and far more spacious. It was a deliberate provocation, but also a prophetic blueprint, and Stout was determined to build it himself. During this period, he encountered Buckminster Fuller at a New York auto show. Fuller had just debuted his radical Dymaxion, a bullet-shaped, three-wheeled vehicle that looked straight out of science fiction. Deeply intrigued, Stout penned an enthusiastic review of the Dymaxion for the Society of Automotive Engineers Journal, an organization he presided over, and this pivotal encounter sparked the grand obsession that dominated his final years. If Fuller had merely conceptualized the future without practical execution, William Stout determined he would go a step further. He would engineer an automobile that was simultaneously revolutionary and drivable, futuristic and functional, beautiful and highly utilitarian. As we analyze this, we realize his victory was bittersweet. The consumer market wouldn't be ready for his creation for another 60 years. The first running prototype of the Scarab was completed in 1932. When it emerged from the Dearborn lab workers, stood in stunned silence, struggling to process the machine before them. It resembled absolutely nothing else on the American highway. No elongated hood, no grand chrome grille serving as a trophy, no detached fenders breaking the vehicle's clean profile. It presented a seamless, continuous aerodynamic envelope stretching from a snub nose down to a bulbous rear that mimicked, indeed, the shell of an ancient Egyptian scarab beetle. Historically, William Stout's choice was highly strategic. In mythology, this creature symbolized rebirth and renewal, precisely how he intended to disrupt the automotive industry. Yet Stout was no traditional stylist. He was an aviation engineer. To translate this conceptual vision into a physical reality, Stout recruited a brilliant strategic partner in Dutch designer John Charda, an automotive pioneer working in the United States who brought vital, pre-existing expertise in highly advanced aerodynamic body design. Charda sculpted the Scarab's unmistakable silhouette, now widely analyzed as a landmark icon of functional design. It featured headlamps recessed behind a delicate vertical grille and slab sides that completely enclosed the rear wheels, with chrome accents below a split windshield and a beautifully tapered tail adorned with fan-shaped chrome styling, which cascaded elegantly from the rear window to the bumper. It possessed an unprecedented avant-garde sophistication, yet simultaneously, it was so radically divergent from conventional norms that the public dismissed it as ugly. Here lies the fundamental strategic paradox: an automobile too advanced to comprehend, too alien to embrace, and far too expensive to market. Yet the real engineering revolution lay beneath. The conventional heavy body-on-frame chassis utilized by virtually every automobile manufacturer of that era was entirely absent in the Scarab. Instead, Stout engineered an aluminum space frame structure, arguably a global first for a production car, drawn directly from the aircraft fuselages he had spent years constructing. The body and chassis fused into a single unit, an early monocoque design that shed weight and lowered the interior floor to a flat plane. This flat floor, as we will see, was the strategic core of the design. By eliminating the central drive shaft hump, Stout unlocked massive interior volume, transforming the cabin into a space comparable to a living room. How did he achieve this layout? In a move deemed highly controversial for the time, Stout positioned the engine in the rear, directly above the rear axle. His chosen power plant was a Ford flathead V8, producing roughly 90 horsepower from a 3.6-liter displacement. This was the identical mass-produced unit powering standard Ford sedans. Inside the Scarab, however, it was mounted backward, with the flywheel and clutch facing forward, mated to a custom 3-speed manual gearbox designed entirely by Stout. This inverted mechanical packaging, with the transmission placed ahead of the rear-mounted engine, significantly lowered the center of gravity distributing power to the rear wheels while bypassing the need for a heavy traditional drive shaft. Let us appreciate the sheer genius of this simple layout. Decades later, the exact same mechanical configuration would power the iconic Lamborghini Countach, one of the greatest supercars in history. Yet the innovations did not stop there. While contemporary cars relied on rigid, solid axles and leaf springs, the Scarab utilized fully independent four-wheel suspension, featuring advanced coil springs and hydraulic dampers. Where did Stout find this design? Aviation, of course. Drawing directly from aircraft landing gear design, he adapted those principles to rear swing-arm suspensions, featuring exceptionally long spring struts. This unconventional setup delivered a ride quality described by contemporaries as exceptionally smooth, far surpassing any standard Ford or Chevrolet of the era. For students of motorsport history, there is a fascinating connection here that deserves close analysis, because this suspension directly inspired the famous Chapman strut implemented by Colin Chapman on the Lotus 12 in 1957. It is historically compelling that Chapman adopted his famous design philosophy directly from Stout, embracing the strategic maxim to simplify, then add lightness, which became the enduring foundation of Lotus engineering. For structural and cabin materials, Stout once again leveraged his aeronautical expertise. The outer skin of the initial prototype utilized aluminum, replicating the fuselage construction of high-performance aircraft. The instrument panel was fabricated from cast magnesium, an exotic material virtually unheard of in automotive manufacturing. Door frames and inner seat structures also utilized lightweight magnesium, yielding a massive vehicle that defied standard weight classifications. Despite a 3.4-meter wheelbase and an overall length exceeding 5 meters, it weighed under 1,400 kilograms. For context, typical American sedans of that era weighed nearly twice as much. Stout applied aerospace design parameters to a road vehicle, producing a machine unlike anything the world had ever witnessed. However, the global market of 1932 was paralyzed by economic depression. Few could afford to finance such a dream. While the mechanical packaging was revolutionary, the cabin was decades ahead. Stout was not merely trying to maximize passenger volume. He aimed to construct a mobile office, redesigning transit from a simple journey into a fully functional living space, a place to work, socialize, and relax. Crucially, the completely flat cabin floor, unburdened by a traditional driveshaft hump, made this modular lounge layout possible. Only the driver's seat remained anchored in position. Every other passenger seat, designed as an individual leather armchair with chrome structural frames, could be repositioned anywhere. Imagine the freedom of turning these seats 180 degrees to establish a face-to-face lounge. Slide them, move them, or remove them completely for an entirely open space. A folding table could be mounted in the center, essentially turning the Scarab interior into a first-class railway compartment, where 4 passengers could play cards, dine, or conduct business while a driver chauffeured them to their destination. Let us pause and analyze that. In 1932, most cars only offered rigid, stiff seats stuffed with horsehair. Yet this designer was already drawing up configurable swiveling seats, a feature Chrysler would market as a breakthrough invention called Swivel and Go, only in 2008, over 70 years later. Entering the vehicle was just as unconventional. Right in the middle of the passenger side, a single passenger door swung outward on specialized hinges, moving the panel completely out of the way to clear the entryway. On the left side, positioned further forward, a narrower door was reserved strictly for the driver. This layout anticipated the sliding passenger doors of modern minivans by decades. Strategically, the doors even featured electric locks, a high-end luxury virtually unheard of in 1936, even on flagship limousines. Inside, the trim featured premium leather, wood and chrome accents with Egyptian-themed styling cues, honoring the scarab beetle, right down to the emblem. Overhead, woven wicker lined the ceiling, and door panels, a feature Stout borrowed directly from the seating of early commercial passenger aircraft. This nod to his aviation roots gave the cabin a highly distinctive atmosphere, part 1920s airplane, part exclusive London gentleman's club. The ventilation system was equally advanced. Fresh air entered through intakes in the vehicle's incredibly short nose, circulating through the interior before exiting at the rear, creating a continuous breeze that kept passengers cool without rolling down any windows. And notice how the windows sat completely flush with the body, minimizing drag while refining the car's aesthetic. It is a detail we take for granted today, but back in 1936, no other production car had them. Now let us examine the strategic failure of its market launch. This brings us to the most tragic strategic misstep. Stout ran an ad campaign in Fortune magazine announcing that production for 1936 would be capped at 100 units, priced at $5,000 each. For context, a Chrysler Imperial Airflow, then the peak of American automotive luxury, cost just $1,345. The Scarab cost nearly 4 times that amount in an era that was anything but prosperous. We are analyzing the bleakest years of the Great Depression, with rampant unemployment and brand new Fords selling for $500. Who would spend $5,000 on an insect-shaped vehicle? The historical data shows only Stout's wealthy associates did. In fact, nearly every buyer sat on his own board of directors, wealthy elites, purchasing not out of necessity, but to fund the dream of a visionary they trusted. Philip Wrigley, the chewing gum magnate, purchased one. Harvey Firestone, the tire baron, and personal friend of both Henry Ford and Thomas Edison, took another. Willard Dow of Dow Chemical and Robert Stranahan of Champion Sparkplug joined them. They were immensely wealthy industrialists, fascinated by advanced technology and bound to Stout by years of strategic business partnerships. But our historical investigation reveals one particular chassis with a wild journey. Scarab number 5 was shipped to Paris, destined for the editor of Le Temps. This alien-looking American machine suddenly found itself cruising Parisian boulevards, surely shocking local onlookers who had never witnessed such futuristic design, on roads dominated by elegant Citroën traction Avants and boxy Peugeots. This Parisian Scarab was destined for unbelievable historical chapters that its creator could never have anticipated, involving World War II Allied generals, a traveling circus, and monkeys. We must analyze this bizarre narrative closely, as it sounds almost too absurd to be factual. Yet historical archives verify every word. Chassis number 5's journey is easily the most cinematic of all. After arriving in the hands of the Le Temps editor, this strikingly unusual American machine became a regular fixture on Paris streets throughout the late 1930s. But in 1940, Germany invaded France, launching a chapter heavily shrouded in historical myth. Contemporary records claim the Scarab was successfully hidden from Nazi officials eager to seize such a unique prize, undoubtedly seeking to analyze and reverse engineer its advanced technical design. And it is during this era that one of the car's most captivating legends took shape. Claims that this very Scarab hosted a highly sensitive summit between General Eisenhower and Charles de Gaulle during the liberation of France. A radical vehicle built by an aircraft designer serving as a mobile command center to plot the fall of Nazi rule. It sounds purely fictional. Yet historical archives from various Concours d'Elegance events where the car was later shown document these accounts. The strategic journey of this Parisian Scarab did not end with the peace treaties. In the 1950s, this highly unique machine fell into the hands of a circus owner who used it for his travels across the European continent. Then comes the bizarre strategic twist that shifts our history into the surreal, because the circus owner decided to house his monkeys inside the vehicle's cabin during city-to-city transfers. Let us analyze this absurd picture for a moment. Here was an automobile engineered as a luxury mobile office for corporate elites, complete with premium rotating leather seats. A folding conference table, chrome details, and wicker trim suddenly demoted to hauling primates along the roads of 1950s France and potentially Italy. Had William Stout known the brilliant inventor, likely would not have known whether to laugh or cry. After the Circus Scarab number 5 passed to a French industrial designer who placed it in a Reims museum, where it remained for several years before being purchased by its current curators, who executed a meticulous, historically accurate restoration to original specifications in 2001. Meanwhile, as his Parisian import endured these bizarre European misadventures, Stout himself was busy planning his next strategic move. Throughout the late 1930s, he constantly drove his personal prototype across the United States, racking up an impressive mileage that eventually topped 250,000 miles, or 400,000 kilometers. For a hand-built engineering prototype, this was an undeniable proof of reliability. Stout strategically used this Scarab as a rolling calling card, driving it everywhere to prove it was no mere styling exercise, but a highly viable machine. During a press-documented 6,000-mile road trip, the Scarab recorded fuel consumption of 12.5 liters per 100 kilometers, an incredibly respectable figure for a vehicle of that scale operating with a heavy V8 engine. Then, World War II erupted, freezing all civil technological progress. In 1943, Stout sold his engineering firm to Consolidated Vultee, the defense giant mass-producing B-24 Liberator bombers. Yet the moment peace returned, Stout aggressively resumed chasing his automotive obsession. Partnering with fiberglass pioneer Owens Corning, he launched the highly secretive Project Y, a radical experimental program designed to engineer an entirely new category of automobile, exploiting a highly revolutionary composite material that absolutely no manufacturer had ever dared apply to a vehicle body fiberglass. The result was the 1946 Scarab Experimental, a prototype that secured 2 historic automotive milestones in one stroke. It was the world's first vehicle with an all-fiberglass monocoque body cured with synthetic resin from just 8 molded parts, and it pioneered the first fully functional air suspension system ever fitted to a road car developed by Firestone, utilizing research dating back to 1933. Visually, it appeared more conservative than its predecessor, featuring 2 doors, a wraparound windshield, and styling cues reminiscent of contemporary Nash sedans. Yet beneath the surface lay an unprecedented powerhouse of experimental engineering. Its media debut would make public relations history. Stout invited reporters to assault the structural shell with heavy hammers, proving the material's sheer durability. Not a single blow left a dent. Mechanically, fiberglass offered 5 times the tensile strength of steel at equal weight, while boasting up to 4 times the impact absorption. Popular Science quickly published a glowing feature on this breakthrough, framing it as definitive proof that automotive design belonged to reinforced plastics. Total development costs, however, climbed to $100,000, an astronomical sum for a sole testbed. Yet Stout strategically never intended to initiate mass production, categorizing it as a mere $100,000 proof of concept for fiberglass as a primary structural medium. 7 years later, in 1953, Chevrolet launched the fiberglass Corvette, prompting historians and the public to hail it as a revolution. Yet Stout had quietly executed this exact breakthrough 7 years prior. Of the 9 pre-war Scarabs engineered, only 5 survive today. The remaining 4 vanished entirely from the historical record. Victims of historical neglect, poor storage, and literal scrapping, a tragic fate for automotive assets now valued at millions. Yet if we examine the archive, the survival of these specimens is as compelling as their initial design. Scarab number 4, for example, spent decades abandoned in the harsh American Southwest desert, exposed to relentless sun and dust, crudely repainted multiple times, treated as an ordinary utility van, rather than one of history's most radical design breakthroughs. Legendary archivist William Harrah finally salvaged it in the early 1970s, absorbing it into his massive Reno, Nevada collection, which housed thousands of historic vehicles representing the world's premier private assembly. But following Harrah's sudden death in 1978, the Holiday Inn Corporation acquired the entire estate, including 1,400 vehicles, initiating a massive liquidation of these assets. This corporate liquidation triggered a 3-year auction frenzy, and amid the market chaos, Scarab number 4 nearly vanished back into obscurity. This is where our investigation shifts to a key figure who dedicated his life to rescuing this lost legacy. Ron Schneider, a highly strategic collector from Franklin, Wisconsin, successfully tracked down and acquired two distinct specimens by 1987, Scarabs number 3 and 4. Both lay in absolute ruin, representing what automotive restorers label a basket case, a disorganized pile of fragments resembling an incomplete puzzle. Historical logs confirm that what was not missing was completely degraded, suffering from every conceivable system failure. Yet after strategically securing his first Scarab in the early 1980s, he spent years merely tracking down missing components before securing a second specimen that required far less structural replication. Yet even this second Scarab demanded 2 full years of rigorous reconstruction, piece by piece, screw by screw. When Scarab number 4 was finally resurrected, Schneider executed a strategic move that caught the collector world off guard. Rather than locking it in a climate-controlled vault for passive admiration, he deployed it directly onto the asphalt, entering the Great American Race. This famous transcontinental endurance run spanned the United States. In 1989, over 50 years after the final Scarab rolled out of the Lun, Stout's laboratory, this 1930s experimental vehicle, was logging thousands of miles on American highways alongside hundreds of conventional classic cars. Schneider repeated this feat in 1990, validating that the structural integrity of Stout's engineering was no historical myth, but a robust reality. Onlookers along the route were transfixed, and every strategic refueling stop or brief pause became an impromptu historical exhibition. Within minutes, crowds materialized to dissect this anomalous machine, which appeared to have arrived from some distant future. Yet the most surprising validation of the Scarab's design came digitally. In 2011, Australian developer Team Bondi integrated the Scarab as one of 15 hidden drivable vehicles in L.A. Noire, a game set in 1940s Los Angeles, often cited as Australia's largest gaming export. Millions of global players were thus granted the chance to virtually pilot an avant-garde machine they likely had never heard of, making this the very first time the historic Stout Scarab name entered their collective consciousness. A digital resurrection for a prototype that in the physical world never even achieved double-digit production figures. Now, you and I must analyze the broader strategic legacy of the Scarab within the global automotive industry. Stout predicted the market would adapt to his design paradigm within 3 or 4 years. His timeline was off by half a century, but his structural critique was entirely correct. The monocoque construction he pioneered in 1932 is now the global structural standard. The 4-wheel independent suspension system engineered for the Scarab is now ubiquitous across modern vehicles. It's modular. Reconfigurable seating configuration is a staple of modern minivans. When Chrysler launched the Voyager and Dodge Caravan in 1983, initiating the American minivan era, they were merely commercializing a design architecture that Stout had executed nearly 50 years prior. Similarly, when Renault introduced the Espace in 1984 as Europe's first multi-purpose vehicle, the core engineering principles mirrored the Scarab maximized interior volume, versatile configurations, and a one-box silhouette. Stout eventually retired to Phoenix, passing away on March 20th, 1956, just 4 days after his 76th birthday. He had published his memoirs 5 years earlier, choosing a highly telling title that translates as "So Away I Went." Until his final hour, he relentlessly continued to conceptualize design and dream of machinery too advanced for his contemporary market. He never witnessed the minivan's commercial triumph, nor Lotus adopting his lightweight structural philosophy as their corporate ethos. He missed Lamborghini appropriating his rear-engine layout to engineer one of the most iconic supercars in automotive history. Yet every time a modern family boards a multi-purpose vehicle for a road trip, or an engineer designs lightweight suspension based on aviation principles, or whenever someone adjusts a modular sliding seat inside their cabin, they are, historically speaking, employing an innovative concept conceived by an Illinois aviation engineer in a Dearborn workshop right during the catastrophic economic crisis of 1929. If this historical postmortem intrigued you, Hit the like button and tell me below which forgotten innovation we should analyze next. And make sure to subscribe to the channel now so you never miss our upcoming investigations into the machines that reshaped global history.